Hello and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. This podcast is sponsored by Guinness, who are also proud sponsors of the Women's Six Nations and will be sponsoring the pod throughout the tournament. A reminder to always drink responsibly. Gavan Casey here, joined as always by the two big men, Murray Kinsella of the 42.e. Murray, how are you?
Good, Gav. Deadly that we get another Six Nations and standalone window for the women's competition. So obviously some big scorelines last weekend, but it's just exciting to see Ireland back in action after a long time.
It really is. I'm looking forward to this standalone competition. I think it could really flourish, having removed itself from the shadow of the men's game, really, and standing on its own 2 feet. There's a lot more room and a lot more scope to talk about it, I think, over the coming weeks, and looking forward to getting stuck into it with yourself and with Bernard Jackman. Bert, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Just on the women's, it's a pity it's clashing with Leinster, Exeter, but I think it's great to see it having its own place in the calendar, and hopefully gets the support that it deserves.
We'll look ahead to that Ireland-Wales encounter in the Women's Six Nations, also going to chat about Exeter, Leinster, as you can imagine. Just to look back on the weekend, Murray and I had a chat on Monday for the 42 members. I subbed in for Owen Toolan, but thankfully didn't provide any real analysis. We swapped roles and we let Murray off the leash a little bit. We don't need to dig into it too much with him, but to get your own thoughts on it, Birch, starting with that Munster-Toulouse game, obviously unbelievable spectacle. Are Munster constantly improving per Johan van Grant's claims?
I don't think they're improved massively. I think they're probably the same place they've been for the last 3 or 4 seasons. Just good enough to be there in the knockout stages. Not an easy game for anybody, but yet probably lacking that killer instinct or that cutting edge to be genuine contenders. So like this year they've got knocked out before the quarterfinal stage of Europe, and I know Toulouse are a strong team, but I'm not sure Toulouse for me are in my top 4. Our top 3 teams likely to win it anyway. Luckily, I suppose for the others, Exeter and Leinster, 2 of the teams who are playing each other this weekend in the quarterfinal stage, so one will exit left. But Munster. Look, there was a better performance than obviously the week before, but there was always going to be that backlash if there hadn't have been. It would have been very disappointing. But I still think to ship 40 points at home, isn't the kind of form or performance that you can really, say, oh, that's where we're at. The 40 points at home is a lot of points, and I actually think Toulouse could have scored maybe more, which shows some of the defensive issues that Munster have at the moment. And I know they were delighted with only conceding 1 try against Leinster, but I still thought their defence was pretty average against Leinster. It was just some very good scramble and probably some poor decision-making execution from Leinster. So I think there's issues there defensively that they need to sort out if they're going to be winning silverware.
Is that the thing that would jump out to you as being the key factor holding them back at this point? Are there other issues? Because when you look at how Toulouse have rebounded really from the doldrums and a period in which they weren't kind of covering the club in glory themselves, they've managed to do that in kind of 3 or 4 years and become a dominant force in Europe. You reckon like they'll probably get semi-finals at least this year? We'll see. Like they have to go to Clermont, obviously, but Munster, on the other hand, have been rebuilding, if you want to call it that, for around the same period of time, and yet Toulouse have passed them out. There's no other real way to put it, I think, after that game.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and Toulouse hit rock bottom. I mean, they actually were in a relegation battle, so there was a real sense of certainty we're not on the right track, and they looked at basically everything, and they realised they lost touch with kind of what made them special, and they lost their identity a little bit, and that's the issue a little bit for Munster, I think, is that like not getting beaten by 10 points by Leinster in the final, having a decent performance against Toulouse, just move on as normal. What Toulouse went through, and I was there, I was in France at the time, they, as I said, they hit rock bottom. They went from being a top 4 team to a bottom 4 team one season, and what they do, they brought back Ugamola, they brought William Servat in, they recruited Antoine Dupont, they bought him from Cast, even though they were in a difficult situation financially, they gambled on him, because they felt that they had guys like Labelle, like Intermac, like Ramos in their academy, as well as Croix, Francois Croix, and some other young forwards, Marchand, etc. So, and they gave those guys their time. So it's a very, it's a clear sense of how they play is old school Toulouse, and also the team is backboned by young Toulouse academy graduates. So there's that sense of identity. So that's the difference between Munster and Toulouse, as far as I can see, is that Toulouse knew they were in trouble and made a plan and strategy to get out of it. And at the moment, I just get a sense of, and I mean, hopefully I'm wrong, is that Munster seem to think they're on the right track. And maybe they are, but I don't know. I think that maybe they're further away than they think they are, and unless they really solve that and kind of get their identity defensively, attack wise, in terms of the personnel of the team, they're going to struggle.
If Munster are on the right track, Murray, it's a long track at this point. And just going back to what Bernard was saying about Toulouse hitting rock bottom, I think we've touched upon it on the pod before, maybe without fleshing it out so much. Munster won't hit rock bottom to the same extent as Toulouse. They're never going to be, you'd imagine they're not going to be in a situation where they're missing out on playoffs even in the Pro 14. Rock bottom was probably 2016, even before the tragedy with Axel and so on. Some of the results were appalling. And they've built themselves back to a certain level since then. But when you're kind of in the knockout stages most years in European competition, when you are making Pro 14 semi-finals, and this year a final without semi-finals, there probably isn't the same impetus to change or to try to see where you're going wrong necessarily, because it might be seen as you're going wrong in only a couple of massive games. But the problems are recurring at this point. And I said after the game on Twitter, usual thing for me, like reflexive reaction to a Munster defeat, and a lot of people didn't really like it. But the problem used to be European semi-finals, and this year they didn't get to one. Last year they didn't even make it out of the pool, so to me it feels like they're further away. And then you have people going, well, they were unlucky this year with the draw against Toulouse, and they were, of course, but like they were unlucky last year with the draw in the pool as well. Like, luck will only take you so far. You can't rely on it. You're going to come across elite teams in this competition at some stage. You can't just be waiting until the semi-finals. So in terms of like I guess long-term progress, I don't see it. I'm wondering, do you see it in line with what Van Gran was saying there on Monday?
I suppose the issue is that the other good teams, the stronger teams, are actually getting stronger at a clearer, more obvious rate. I think like Toulouse have a lot left in them. I think Leinster do probably as well in their own mind. Exeter do, Racing certainly do, and will keep improving. And obviously all those clubs have strong budgets as well to make right moves, even if it's not from homegrown players. They can all improve. So yeah, I probably don't see them accelerating at that level, but within Munster they'll feel, listen, we're close. We ran Leinster, well, not close in that final, but we've run them close a few times recently. We gave Toulouse an unbelievable battle. They'll feel RG Snyman, one of the best players in the world, is coming back next year, and Jason Jenkins is coming in as well, so that even if you lose CJ Sander, you're getting two powerful forwards back. They'll feel that a couple of those promising players who we've discussed quite a lot on this podcast are a step closer to contributing. They'll feel that Joey Carberry finally free of injury and getting back up towards his best, which understandably he wasn't in the two massive games. It would have been a massive ask for him to boss them after so long out, but they'll feel with him at tip-top shape, they will close the gap, and that's how they see it. That's what we know from everything Johan McGrath has said. For me, no, probably not to that extent. And as I say, other teams appear to be moving forward with more conviction, I suppose, than Munster do.
Yeah,
There's danger then of... Sorry, Brent.
Gav. Yeah, I'm not saying... I hope that wasn't taken as, I think Van Gran or anyone... It's not a direction that any of the coaches... it's just as an organisation, anecdotally, Munster spend a lot of money on this. This squad costs a lot of money. They're not the poor relations of European rugby anymore. Okay, Racing and Toulouse Well, Racing for sure would have a bigger budget, but they spend enough to be more than competitive. I'm just talking around spending that money really wisely. Having a real smart strategy in terms of your roster, in terms of your depth chart, in terms of where you spend your money. Like for example, like for me, Exeter Leinster this weekend. Look at the tight head. Look at the 2 and 3 in both teams, and then look at the backup 2 and 3. They're proper international or Champions Cup quality players. And look at 2 and 3 for Toulouse. Look at 2 and 3 for Racing. Look at 2 and 3 for Claremont. That's where I think Munster's issue is a little bit. Is Snyman would be great, but unless you get a front row who can do what the top teams do, you're always going to be vulnerable. And I just don't think. I think that's where Munster are. That's one area, for example, in terms of the squad depth, is where they're a little bit behind.
There is a danger of getting caught in purgatory as well, though, Bernard, isn't there? When you're knocking on the door constantly, ultimately, eventually, you have to open the door. But when you're at it, it sort of feels like you're doing things right. And again, there isn't that maybe internally there maybe isn't a need to change seen by people within that organizational structure, not just the coaches, as you say.
Yeah, look at I don't know who does I don't know. It's a difficult one because they kind of have a different setup off the field than others. I think obviously a new CEO come in. Johan Razzie Erasmus was the DOR, and he looked after contracts. He looked after the game strategy. He looked after retention. He seems to do everything, right? There's very few guys who can do what Razzie or Joe Schmidt does, and I probably think there may be missing somebody who's just there in terms of long-term succession planning and making sure that the right decisions are being made, so that they can have sustainable success rather than a head coach. And I know this from experience. It's a very difficult thing to do, to think long-term. When you're on a medium to short-term contract. I mean, that's where you need someone above you who's able to make those decisions or have those discussions. That's for the best for the team or organization long-term. And at the moment in Munster, I mean, Johan, I'm not sure how much experience he has of building squads like Razzie had. His background was a forwards coach, obviously with the box and around the Bulls. So, and then obviously he's got, he doesn't seem to have a director of rugby or a guy used to be type in Leinster who looks after all that. So it's an unusual setup, which is fine. You just got to make it work for them. And I would worry about. Now we spoke about Jenkins last week, and I don't want to be picking on him, but and I know loads of people think it makes perfect sense. For me, it wasn't a priority for where they have something coming through and where they're weak, and that's I think we have to ask those questions when we have doubts about it, because when you are an Irish province, you need to make those foreign player spots absolutely count. There's no margin for error, and you can be unlucky like Snyman, and that's part of the risk you take. But if you sign somebody in a position where you've got some depth, and there's a massive gap somewhere else, well then the questions have to be asked.
And Gav, like, I know a lot of people think it's probably like shit on Munster week, month, season, and we end up talking about them in a negative light. But like, their stated ambitions are to win trophies and to be genuine contenders consistently, and that hasn't. It's probably less so the case in the last while in terms of them being really genuine contenders. The Leinster final was a dominant performance from Leinster, and as Birch says, they've been knocked out before the quarterfinals for 2 seasons in a row, as others kind of pull clear. And there's something like Munster could be. They've so many unique and amazing factors to the club. I know there's no fans there at the moment, but like Tone Park is one of the most special places in world rugby. Limerick rugby was such a beacon of everything and almost kickstarted Irish rugby in a way, that Munster team. So there's passion there. There's people who want to see more from it. There's people who want to have a more identifiable, I suppose, sense of what Munster is to grasp onto and drive things forward. So, we're probably looking at it all in negative light. They're doing loads of good things, but it could be better.
Could be. Any questions about Connacht, Bernard, and where they're going? It was a disappointing result, I thought, at the weekend, given Leicester were missing a few of their frontline players, albeit we kind of suspected that it was going to be tough for Connacht anyway. Just felt a little bit deflating, I guess, after a season where they threatened to kind of produce something. And I don't know, maybe a sense of familiarity about it from a Connacht point of view.
Yeah, unfortunately, we proved what we said last week, proved right, that Leicester's strength around the line-out maul is Connacht's weakness. So it had a huge impact on the game. I think Connacht will be very disappointed because they actually got back. They got back into the game when they had no right to, and I think it was the 72nd minute. They were back within a couple of points. Leicester kicked off, and Papali'i got stripped in the 22, and Leicester scored from that, and the game got away from him. So, the small moment like that probably cost them. But having said that, they did look a team a little bit off. And look, there's been issues in the background there. Obviously, 2 coaches leaving, probably a bit of uncertainty. A lot of close games that they lost that they could have potentially won. So, probably self-belief and confidence isn't where it needs to be. And I think they're a team who'll be looking forward to the off-season, getting a new coaching group together and trying to fix some of the little frailties that have cost them. And they're not far away. They're not far away at all. And even against Leicester, even though the scoreline, was a huge scoreline, they did score some good tries, and they have lots of positives about them. Certainly their line-out maul defence has been poor all. That's something that they'll need to fix defensively as well. Yeah, I think probably a change of defence philosophy might be good for them. But yeah, it is frustrating if you're a Connacht fan. But I do think the raw materials are there, and I think that senior coach that Andy Friend is looking for, that's going to be a key appointment. And I think it's great. They have appointed and promoted, Colin Tucker and Mossy Lawler. But you would say, they probably need one more experienced guy, and I know they're looking for that. So that, and then obviously, just have a good pre-season and fix the issues that have been kind of prevalent this season.
Might be an opportunity for them at the start of next season, Murray, knowing that their entire coaching team at that point will be settled and tied down for a couple of years, to really start building from there. And some of those issues to which Bernard alluded as well, address those with guys that are going to be there for the medium-term future.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've had a good commitment from players they wanted to recontract, as we mentioned on Monday, keeping all their key guys, really. A couple of them are only 1-year contracts, which is interesting in itself. Probably a few who want to get back in the Ireland mix and said, I'll commit here again. So it feels like a big year ahead for this group. And that's not to, I suppose, excuse. They'll feel this season was, a bit of a wasted season. It's been all over the place, obviously, and they had no playoffs in the Pro 14 to aim for. And obviously the formats, as you mentioned, were completely rejigged. But that's not to say that players won't feel that's a year of my career that I didn't achieve what I wanted to. Maybe I fell out of the mix in Ireland and not even in the squad anymore. So there'll be a lot of people in that group with major points to prove, I think. And the next few months, even before the off-season, are going to be key to that. It's a great opportunity for them with this Rainbow Cup coming up and whatever format we end up eventually with that, to maybe start making a couple of changes personnel-wise, get a little bit more experience, and then be in position during the summer to really kick on and get that clear progress that we thought we had seen and felt we'd seen under Andy Friend going again with a bit of renewed energy.
Ulster's season continues then, Birch. Another one you got right. They went to Harlequins. They made Jerry Flannery eat his words. We did say on Monday Flannery wasn't wrong in what he said, but Ulster hammering Harlequins still made it funny. And it was a spectacular performance in many ways. They'll feel absolutely primed to win this competition now, even with the trip to the Saints to come. Yeah,
absolutely. I think when Dan saw the team sheet for Harlequins, he must have been delighted. And I think there's question marks around. I don't think it's great. I know it's a condensed season, and there's been a lot of games, etc. But it's not good for the competition to see a knockout game like that being played with a vastly understrength. So all Ulster could do is go and put them away, and I thought they looked good, and we'll get points from it. Ironically, I watched Northampton Dragons. Northampton did great to come back, but and score a lot of points late, and I think they won 44-39 or something like that. But I didn't think Northampton were great either, and I think Ulster will fancy their chances. I do think this is a brilliant opportunity for Ulster to go and win silverware, and even though it looks like a tough draw away from home again, I would be surprised if Ulster weren't good enough to go and get the job done.
You fancy them as well, Murray, don't you?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I totally agree that this is a brilliant opportunity for them. And while maybe there's factors like an understrength Quins team to consider on the way, just winning a trophy and the bounce you get out of that is massive. It will be really important for this group who feel they've made really good progress under Dan McFarland on a similar project that he's been driving forward, and a style of play that's really identifiable and the players have absolutely embraced. And I agree. I don't think Northampton are a kind of force of European rugby. They've got some really good attacking weapons out the back line. Someone like Nairvor, who scored 2 tries in that pretty impressive comeback, as Bernard says, last weekend against Dragons. Dan Bigger's been injured, but he's a maybe kind of for this week. A few young guys like Fraser Dingwall who can cut you open, but I think Ulster will have strength up front to kind of get on top of them and give that really exciting backline. Like, just so exciting, that backline at the moment. Plenty of opportunity to strike. Guys like Lowry, Balakoon, Stockdale, these are the people we want to see on the ball with a little bit of time and space, because they can do real damage. The midfield as well, even picking it is tough because you have Stuart Moore emerging, and Hume's been so good, and McCloskey obviously always really important and integral, and John Cooney, what an attacking weapon he can be. So I'm excited to watch them again, and I do think they'll feel this is a really brilliant opportunity. There's the Rainbow Cup, as I mentioned, as well, so potentially there as well, and you finish a weirdo season in a really positive way, and you get that bounce for next season.
You had a question sent to you via email, Murray, that I'm going to read out here before we move on from last weekend. And it came from Connor. And Connor says, "Hope you're well. I have a slightly more detailed one than would fit in the WhatsApp group." That's when you know it's serious. He says, "Is the siding system in rugby broken? We saw Genge escaped a sighting for an elbow to Sexton's face a couple of weeks ago, and now Jake Ball has escaped a sighting for the clearly reckless high shot on Faf. At the very least, why not use a sighting commissioner's warning to acknowledge foul play? If I think back, there are very few sightings I can think of in recent months, the Marler grope being a high-profile exception. Do you get the sense that, or do you have a sense of whether this plays out in the data? I know more stuff is caught in the form of red cards. This is taking so long to read, the screen locked on me. In the form of red cards, which is great, but there are as many more red cards as there are, are there as many more red cards as there are fewer sightings? It doesn't feel like a balance has been struck to me. Perhaps there's an overemphasis on the ref's word being final and not wanting to go beyond that. But I don't like that. Refs are human and performing under pressure, and sightings are a great weapon in the arsenal. Are there financial pressures, team putting pressure on unions not to lose players to bans? I don't know. I'm reaching in the dark, but I would love to know if you've thought about this. Best, Connor." Murray, take it from there.
Yeah, I probably haven't thought of it in exactly the same way, but I've thought about how frustrating it is, and it's not the first email or message that I've received about the disciplinary process generally around rugby. This and TV rights and who's got which rights are probably the two things that frustrate fans most from my experience. And I totally agree. We did a members newsletter about it recently enough, saying that, Joe Schmidt's gone into that high-powered role in World Rugby, a lot of stuff around law and refereeing and match officials, and I felt that this is one of the big areas that he can bring a bit of cohesion and regularity to, because it is baffling at times, even when there is a sighting and then there's the process and there's a ban, and they can be so varying and so confusing, I suppose is the word for supporters. One incident will get a 10-week and one will get a 6-week. Even with the high tackles one we saw this week, Tuolagi for Agen, he got a 14-week entry point on his high tackle, which looked similar to others that I've seen. And it wasn't clear even from the statement why exactly they felt that. So yeah, it's a really frustrating part of the game. I think you can discuss each incident. There's a couple mentioned in the email there from Connor, as to its merits, and the ball one absolutely baffled me again. I don't have any answers really for it, to be honest, but I do hope that there's an awareness in World Rugby in particular that obviously there's different bodies making these decisions and they've got to run their own disciplinary processes, but it needs to be more cohesive, as I say, across the game, because at the moment no one really knows what's going on.
Birch, I can see you itching to jump in here.
No, it's a great question. I think it's broken. The system is broken badly. And I'll be honest, I actually think the model that they have at the moment doesn't really make sense, which is where kind of an ex-referee will go to the game. He'll normally sit near where the commentators are on a laptop, and he'll try and pick up, it's generally a man, he'll try and pick up, any foul play. I think there could be value in actually using the professional referees, maybe on a Monday, to actually go through the games and look for citing things. I think it's difficult for the people, one guy on his own, maybe under the pressure to make a decision pretty quickly, to pick up on it. But maybe with a little more time, with specialist referees who are professional, it might be good for them as well to be able to be part of more preview of games together, via virtually or whatever, to try and get more consistency there, because it's not consistent at the moment, and the game is already complicated enough, and we're not doing much to help educate fans, probably educate players as well, because of the lack of consistency. So that maybe there's enough things for Joe Schmidt to look at in terms of the on-field refereeing and things like that, but it's probably the next step is to try and get some kind of consistency there. And if you have the same people making the decisions every week, well, then it's probably more chance of getting some consistency, which isn't the case. I mean, you look up who deciding officer is at a list of games. I mean, it's a lot of different people. I don't want to trip away and things like that, but it might be just something we could get professionals involved in more.
What about that for a prospective solution, Murray?
Yeah, it's probably something that needs a bit of investment. Whether this is the time that World Rugby are going to redirect some funds into that, I'd be surprised if that was the case. But absolutely, that's how you would get a bit more cohesion, a bit more uniformity in decisions, and a bit more understanding from players and coaches who are equally as frustrated by all of this as to what's happening. And you probably need a big enough team there to absolutely nail everything. You would probably end up with a position where, because like anytime I watch matches back, and I'm sure you do as well, Birch, you spot one or two in probably every single game, especially now with the elbows and leading forearms. Even the Ty Byrne one where he gets injured, like that's a leading elbow first, I think, before the Toulouse carrier lands on him. And there's probably going to be even more bans then if this is... I suppose souped up and you get a department looking at it, but that's probably good for player welfare as well. I can't see them making that investment, but as the frustration builds and builds, I think there's going to be more and more clamour for this to be figured out.
I actually think it's the opposite, Murray. I think it's less investment, because effectively at the moment there's a feeling that the signing officer commissioner needs to be at the game, right? And that's obviously, you've got your expenses involved in bringing somebody to a game. What I'm saying is, can that process not be moved offline? Like you review a game, or I review a game after the game. You've got professional referees who from Monday to Friday, I know they have their fitness sessions and all that, but surely they're not busy 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, that they could find a couple of hours to do a game each, and then have a central contact point where they discuss all the incidents as a group of referees, and then decide which ones deserve to go further. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying add additional resource. Okay. I'm saying get the people who are professional referees involved in this process, which I think could work better.
Okay, yeah, that does make sense. Sorry, I thought you were talking about employing more people to take on roles, but yeah, that would absolutely make sense. No, the refs would tell you they're busy on a Monday. They'd say they're flat out, so they've got a tough job as it is.
One of these days we're going to lose one of you to a really high-profile World Rugby position, I think. So before that happens, let's chat about Exeter, Leinster. Bernard, when it became apparent that Leinster were going to be travelling to Sandy Park to play Exeter, without having played their own last 16 game against Toulon. What was your initial reaction? Because I guess everybody's instinct is to wonder, okay, who wins that game from the off? And has that impression changed at all as the week's gone on?
Look, I was happy Leinster didn't have to play Toulon. I think it's good for Leinster to get a rest weekend. I think they would have beaten Toulon, but it just took out the risk of injury, gives them an extra couple of days to focus on Exeter. I'm sure Leo Cullen and Stuart have been having a look at Exeter for the last couple of weeks, to be honest. They were always likely to beat Leon. I know Leon got a good start. But they're a very good side, and it's a brilliant fixture for Leinster to test themselves again. Obviously, they haven't had a real chance, to go into a different level since Saracens. Obviously, and they failed in that. So I think they've been itching for this opportunity. And Exeter are the champions, double champions, and yeah, they'll be relishing this. And I think it'll be a fascinating game, to be honest. I think Exeter are a brilliant team to watch. Have a real strong identity, real stability, really good team spirit. Have now tasted success, and the hard part is to back it up. To win 2 European Cups consecutively is very difficult, and they'll be striving for that. And Leinster haven't won since 2018, and I genuinely feel for Leinster, the real challenge for them is to win European Cups. They're too strong for the Pro 14 at the moment. So this team will want to rectify that. So it's the clash of the weekend for me.
I suppose that's been an interesting aspect of the build-up, Murray, the fact that both teams or both camps have been fairly transparent in admitting that they watch each other fairly closely and have been watching each other probably from a fair while out ahead of this game, long before the fixture was even concrete. So it's a weird one. It's like both teams kind of know exactly what the other is going to do. Does that then become an arm wrestle, or does it come down to bringing a little bit of nuance that you wouldn't say is that either team is averse to, but just trying to create something that the other team hasn't seen you do so far?
Yeah, I'm absolutely really excited by the prospect of seeing what Stuart Lancaster or Rob Baxter or whichever coach it is has kind of conjured up to throw a little bit of different picture at the two teams, because a lot of what they do is very similar, and as you say, they've taken inspiration from each other. They're both remarkably effective down the 22 and have similar strategies and similar variety to it. It's about power, it's about grinding teams down, but even if you saw how Exeter did it last weekend against Leon, who defended it really poorly, it has to be said. I thought Sam Warburton was bang on the commentary about Leon's lack of work rate, getting around the corner and just filling those first couple of spots around the ruck. But even at that, it's not always just a pick and jam with the pre-latches. Sometimes the player at the base of the ruck can tip a pass. You saw one where there was a short pass and then tipped on again by Johnny Gray to Devoto running a line outside him. They can play out the back at times as well if the defence gets too condensed around the ruck. So there is little strategies around it, and Leinster something similar, different ways and tools for finishing. Even around some of the strike plays they use, they're similar, those kind of blocker plays. And I suppose everyone's using them now, where the 12 will be the first receiver and they'll play out the back, but they both do it really well. So it'll be fascinating to see which of them can negate the strengths that they know so well and train against on a regular basis, and then what is the little point of difference. And it may be something really little. It may be one play, it may be one little change of a usual tactic, and throw something a little bit different, as well as the set piece battle, which is massive for both teams. And they're the access points into the 22, into the good positions on the pitch. I think Leinster, weirdly enough, because last time in a big Champions Cup game was against Saracens where the scrum got demolished, but I have a feeling they might be really targeting that. Leon got a little bit of change there, and Birch will probably give the technical insight on that, but I feel scrum and line out as well. The Exeter success rate is down around 80%. I think they've had a few little issues there, and Leon got some good pressure again. So I think that set piece battle and the penalties there and as I say, the access points are going to be absolutely massive in this.
Yeah, just something for people watching the game. I mean, certainly my impression of Exeter had been, really good philosophy in terms of playing from deep, keeping the ball alive, playing down the blind side. But in the 22, really relying on their forwards, and they've actually shifted their kind of strategy from kicking to the corner and mauling. They'll actually kick to the corner and play off the top, and hit up the centre, or play some kind of a back peel to get them away from that touchline and get them towards the post for that pick and go game, which they're very successful on. So that's an interesting one. In terms of a little adaptation they've done. They don't kick to the corner and maul as much as Leinster will. They want to get towards the posts and open up both sides, but obviously very reliant on our forwards. I think scrum wise, Harry Williams struggled a little bit last weekend. You know, Leon have a good pack, and you know, they tested a little bit, but I think they'll have learned a lot from that. I thought the scrum was quite messy last week, and I think looking at how Leinster scrum, it's much more around stability and being able to play off it, and they've got much tighter in that since Saracen. So I don't think that Leinster scrum will be as messy as Leon's, and I think both teams will have good quality ball to play off. But I just think the physicality and ability to turn 22 entries into points. Both teams are brilliant at it, and it could be just one big defensive stand. One jackal turnover that could win the game, because there's very little between these two teams, and it's going to be fascinating.
And they can both open up. Like again, the Munster final, we saw Leinster probably be a bit more, play with a little bit more width and a couple more passes in the middle third to create chances. Clearly, having identified that, as you said after that game, Bernard. And Exeter have worked hard to probably build those strands. Even their kick return, obviously with Stuart Hogg coming in, that was going to be a massive part of what he added, as well as kicking strengths and being able to strike on set piece plays. But they have got that little bit more intent now, where if you kick a little bit loosely out to them, they'll, but in the past, oftentimes they were kind of grinding phase play team, but now they strike with a little bit more intent early, I think, on turnover as well. And guys like Woodburn and O'Flaherty are more than capable of doing that as well. Henry Slade is a classy attacking player, and even Simmons at out half can open up as well. So they've probably built those strands as well as Leinster, while not always going to them in games where they can physically dominate and bully their way to it. So it has all the makings of an unbelievably even, and as we said on Monday, Gav, final-esque kind of game, albeit at the quarterfinal stage.
Just from a Leinster defensive strategy point of view, Bernard, if you're saying, say, that Exeter are trying to move play towards the posts and it opens up either side, does that mean then to cut out their pick and go strength, Leinster need to actually stop it nearly at source and prevent them from getting to central areas in the 22? Like, is there a way of stopping it before it even becomes an issue?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, obviously the defensive line out, Murray's has flagged that the percentages have dropped a little bit down to 80%, in 80%, low 80%. And obviously that's the best part. I think once Exeter get the ball in 22, they are difficult to stop because they're very similar. I mean, Leinster started to do the tap and go instead of kicking to the corner or scrummaging, and it's pre-planned 4 phases with the right guy carrying, the right guy latching. I mean, Exeter have been doing this for 3 or 4 years on general play. And that's why they have such a high conversion rate. So realistically, I think if they get into that crash or ground and pound type game, it's going to be difficult. And the best place to stop them is at line out. And Leo's selection, in terms of obviously who he can pick this weekend and how they can, maybe they'll give him the front and make them play off the front, and that obviously gets you a chance to catch him behind the gain line, or will they commit, with 2.5 pods in the air and a single lift to the front and try and cover off all options? But if they can rob one there, it's literally something, just one turnover could decide it. Because I do think if Exeter get 5 or 6 yards out in the middle of the field, they're so good, and the way the laws are at the moment, they'll be playing off a penalty advantage and they'll probably score.
If you were Rob Baxter, then Murray, what would be the one area in particular that you'd be looking to stop Leinster succeeding in?
There's so many to choose from. Like literally every part of their game, like every part of their game is strong. And I know I heard Alex Sanderson talking about La Rochelle, and he's saying we kind of focus on shark bait players each week and guys we have to stop. But he said La Rochelle have a number of them, but so do Leinster, and guys, as Byrne said, who are match sharp. But I kind of had the feeling that Leinster would have liked a game to get a bit more cohesion in their team before a test as big as this. So you can see it both ways. I think if he's picking out one, I suppose it's stopping those Leinster forwards getting a bit of a gain line, because we saw the results of that against Munster when they win the first couple of carries, and they're really good at doing that. They have a number of tools, like not just bullying power, but their footwork is really good. They can tip passes in or out, and they're really good at timing their runs. I think it's been really prominent recently, especially off 9. Someone like Josh van der Fleer, who's not the biggest guy, but he's been bringing brilliant timing and aggression in that sense. Once Leinster get that little bit of go forward, someone like Johnny Sexton pulling the strings, and an array of backline talents, Robbie Henshaw being one of the most informed backs in rugby, really, they're very difficult to stop. So I'd say they'll put a massive focus on that as they do every single weekend. And they've got a lot of meaty, tough forwards. Guys like Johnny Gray, obviously, big, massive giant of a man. Sam Simmons, who's been unlucky with England, really unlucky, but is an absolute force of nature for them. They've got guys who will be really thrilled at facing a challenge like that against Leinster as well. So yeah, it's a riveting kind of matchup.
Birch, it must be so enjoyable this week for a coach on both sides of it, really, because there's absolutely no animosity between them, to my knowledge at least. They ooze respect for each other publicly, both Lancaster and Cullen and Baxter. And yet, that almost makes it personal. When you admire each other's work, you want to get one up on the other. And separate to just wanting your teams to win, there is a kind of a strategic or tactical battle to be won here, and both sides will be absolutely desperate to win it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know a little bit about Exeter because I did a bit of study on them, and they actually empower the players to do a huge amount of the strategy work. So Baxter's is a bit of a nose on the game, so he still codes the games himself and everything. So it's not like he doesn't have a strong work ethic or anything like that. It's effectively they have groups who each week have to basically pick out clips of the opposition and then obviously pick out how they're going to target that or what elements of their game can work against, and they present on the Monday. So they'll do the work. They would have done the work for Leinster previous week, and everyone's involved in it, and they present back to the coaches and group then, and then they agree on a strategy. So it's very interesting. They're probably the club who've gone the deepest in that I've seen, and so their players are tactically very very strong. And what the players and coaches see in Leinster, because we don't see them being tested that often. I think there's one little area that they probably will go after, is that pick and go through the middle, because Leinster fan out so well, because they've got such good line integrity, because they've got good line spacing. They have been caught a little bit there on occasions, and that might be something that we see Exeter going after, because they have the ball players in around the ruck to go through the ruck. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try and implement a little bit of that. But after that, it's a case of not getting spooked. I mean, there's a rumour going around that Munster spent a lot of time the week of the final trying to change their game to play Leinster. And what we saw was they didn't really get to implement anything. So you have to be very careful that whatever slight tactical change you make, it's aligned to things that you do well, and have done in the past, especially in a 1 week turnaround. So that'll be. I don't see there being drastic shifts in terms of how both teams play, and I do think Leinster played the way they played in the first half against Munster because of Munster's defence. So I'd be surprised if Leinster got that space on the outside as easily against Exeter, or even tried to get it as easily or tried to get it as early in the game. But look, that's what makes it fascinating, and we look forward to seeing what both teams try and do to target each other.
Well, if it does become an arm wrestle, Murray, then that's likely where it'll be decided, is that if there is that one little bit of space at one juncture in the game, who takes it? And I'm asking you that question. Who actually does take it, do you think, or who wins?
it's impossible to call, really. I'll go Exeter by a point. They're home. They've got a real drive in their journey, but that's not to say Leinster don't either. I think, I'm just randomly picking out a number, to be honest. Exeter by 1.
That's how you know it's a good one. Birch, is there a point in asking?
Yeah, no, I fancy Leinster, actually. I think this is massive for them. I think I don't think they saw the Saracens result coming. It was so hard to see it coming, obviously, everything that happened. And I think they need Europe badly. And I think they have enough quality to get to overcome it.
Can't wait for it. Let's chat Women's Six Nations then before I let you go, gentlemen. And while the tournament has already kicked off and is a week old, Ireland kick off their own campaign this weekend against Wales. They're talking a big game, Murray. Looking at some of the interviews that the players have been doing during the week, and they really fancy an upset in this competition. It wouldn't be an upset to beat Wales. They beat them well last season, or last year rather, and Wales got hockeyed by France in their opener. But it's a chance, I guess, to start your campaign off on the right foot. We've seen it in the men's competition so often. How many times have you and Owen Toolan spoken about it? Momentum is key. Get off with the winning start and then see what happens from there.
Particularly with such a short, condensed format where you've got 2 games and you're into your playoff. There's no room for error in this game in particular, because obviously England and France are still streets ahead, and that is worrying that they're going to pull even further ahead. And listen, not pointing fingers at Scotland or Wales, like they're dealing with what they've got, but it's not great in the first weekend when there's 2 hammerings, let's be honest. But Ireland, the confidence is based on having had so much time training together. Obviously you want to be playing games, but they've never had like 20 camps together to focus on tactics, to improve all sorts of things, even conditioning wise. They feel they're in the best place possible. Plus the bits we've seen, albeit very limited, but back in October when they played Italy, it was a really promising performance. There were some brilliant passages of attacking play in that game. If people can think back, where it was multi-phase, it was forwards and backs connected, there was real width, there was lovely handling skill, there was little bits of innovation, a couple of vertical stacks, things like that. Players clearly grasping some of the tactical guidance they'd be given and taking a bit of ownership for decision-making responsibility as well. And they defended superbly in that game. There were some massive tackle counts. Their breakdown aggression and accuracy really in the jackal was excellent as well. So they'll feel that their most recent reference points is a really strong one. And even before in 2020, early 2020, pre-COVID, there were promising signs there as well. So before this all got shut down and slowed up, Ireland were definitely moving in the right direction, and will feel they're well poised to do that now this weekend. They're away from home, and Wales absolutely, as you say, are going to be really eager to bounce back and show more of what they're capable of. But it feels like a good chance for Ireland to kick things on. The squad is in a pretty good place. A couple of injuries to the likes of Muldoon and Cooney's out as well. But Ethan McDermott's back in there, and younger players as well have stood up. I can't wait to see Bevan Parsons play again. It's a really obvious one, but she is a superstar, and every time she gets the ball, creates something defensively. I thought in that Italy game she was superb when they got aggressive up on the edge, made some really good reads. So yeah, it's a really exciting place for the squad in terms of personnel as well. Even in the back row with Claire Malloy having returned, you've actually got some tough decisions to make there, because Dorothy Wall has emerged as a real force as well, physically and learning all the time. So I think they're in a pretty good place, Gav. This is a massive fixture because the week after you're playing France, and while they will be very ambitious about winning that, realistically they got to make sure they've ticked the W box this coming weekend.
Birch, I saw Catherine Dane mention they'd been training for basically 20 weeks in advance of the tournament, and just wondering from a coaching point of view, like, what are the challenges there that Adam Griggs would have faced, I guess, in terms of keeping players fresh, not only physically but mentally, because it feels like an enormous camp almost to be in. I know there would have been breaks, but it's an enormous amount of preparation towards a tournament, like when you're getting all of these delays and postponements and 6 months since they last played a competitive game. So how do you navigate that as a coach?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, and I think it's probably credit to the players' motivation and resolve that they've been able to stay in the fight for that long, and I'm sure they're just itching to play. I think the big problem for them is they're not getting games elsewhere, and So it's just how intense you can make training. Does he have the quality to be able to do, proper 15v15 and have it very competitive or at test level standard? I'm not sure. I'm sure he's going to try and develop that depth. And obviously Wales have had the advantage of having played a game, even though it was a tough defeat, but that will be a big advantage to them. So look, I'm sure they just no team deserve to get out in the field and play as much as they do, given what they've had to put in over the last time and the uncertainty around the calendar. But yeah, and I think the coaches, they seem to have a really good relationship with the players, and I'm sure that they've got that balance right in terms of trying to work on the game, but also keep the mind right as well, because it must be so frustrating being that long without playing, and also obviously not knowing for sure what's going to happen. But now they have a bit more certainty in their calendar, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how they go on Saturday.
In that, I think it might have been Aoife McDermott rather than Catherine Dane who said it during the week, but the idea that because the IRFU have provided a little bit more in the department of, or in the area of resources, Ireland feel confident, Murray, that over the next couple of years they can bridge that gap a little bit and become almost, as Aoife described it, as nearly a semi-professional team, and that will allow them to move that little bit closer to France and England. Between now and then, while that progress continues, and allowing for the fact that they're extremely confident that they have become a better team over the last 12 months, even without playing many games. Is it about beating the other sort of like the other teams in and around their level, or how important is it that they actually get an upset? Is that even a realistic thing to expect for them to knock off England and France in the next couple of years, or are they too far ahead?
It will be a massive upset in the short term. And as I say, because those programs, professionalism in England, semi-pro in France, because they're in place now, that probably accelerates things even more. And that's not to say, like, the Irish players are unbelievably professional and have been for a long time in their approach and their training, and their camps are really high quality and high pressure. And that side of things, there's no doubt about how much is being put in by individuals and maximising every bit of resource they have, but it can always have more support. And professionalism here clearly is a long way away, because, David Nucifora said as much recently, that's not a priority for them. The priority is behind that, probably in getting the structures and the pathway and the pipeline right to create a little bit more depth before that point. So absolutely, in the next few years, without wanting to sound unambitious on their behalf, Ireland will have to be targeting being that third place nation in Six Nations time, all the more so because that's what qualifies you into the top tier of the WXV competition from 2023 onwards. And absolutely looking for scalps every single time. You're never going to go and play for Ireland against England, against France, against anyone thinking we're going to lose here, or it's okay for us to lose here. So absolutely, they'll feel right now this weekend if they can get a bounce with a good performance, get back to that progress they were making. Then they've got France at home, and that's an advantage in terms of the travel, etc. So they'll feel they can always make a good shot at winning against those top tier nations. But I do see the gap opening up, and I think there is onus on the RFU to make sure that stuff they're talking about in terms of the good work that's been done with girls rugby, getting the structure nailed on in terms of AIL and that competition for players when they're not in Ireland camp. That's really important, because again, England have their Premier 15s, and there's some strong French clubs as well. So it's good. It's a good kind of barometer for Irish rugby to keep up with.
Bert, will they get the job done in Wales this weekend?
Yeah, I think so. I think I think they're building nicely, and even though the lack of match practice will obviously, I think, take a while to get out of their system, I think this Welsh team are vulnerable, and Ireland will win.
Same for you, Mer?
Yeah, I'm feeling positive about their chances, and I think they'll play an attractive brand of rugby, and I'll be really interested also to see the engagement from everywhere else. As Byrne says, it's unfortunate in terms of the actual timing of the clash, but it's on RTE and it's an Ireland team, and there's no clash with a men's Ireland team. So there'll be opportunity there for people to tune in and hopefully see a really good performance.
Looking forward to it. One last question that came in just before the deadline as we were beginning to record from our good pal Kaelon in the 42 members WhatsApp group, members.the42.ie, if you want to join up there and join the good folks in there. Kaelon was saying, can you ask the lads, and I'll direct this to yourself first, Bernard, if they think the JIFF rules in France has helped increase the number of French teams making a run at Europe. We now see Matthias Lebel being crucial at Toulouse, Arthur Retier at La Rochelle, whereas 7 years ago it was Drew Mitchell and Brian Abana at one club. Have the rules helped to broaden the standard across the top 14? And first, Birch, if you would mind just giving people a refresher or a synopsis as to what the rules actually are.
Yeah, so basically, JIFF is a player who's formed or comes through a French academy. And if they spend 3 years in a French academy and they pass certain criteria around education, etc., then they're JIFF for life. And basically, there's a very strict rules around how many JIFF players you have to have in your match day 23 for the top 14, which is now 16. You have to have an average of 16 JIFF players in your squad for top 14, except for the team who gets promoted. They're allowed to have one less for the first year, which is 15. So beyond this year can have 15. All your clubs have to finish at the end of the season on 16. So that's very important. And also the other thing is you get your TV money is based on a percentage of JIFF. So the more you have over 16, the more money you get. So for example, at the moment, Racing are out in front. They have an average of 20.1 JIFF players per match day squad. And Bordeaux are at 15.9. So currently Bordeaux are under it, right? So how this manifests itself is that every week the coach would have to go to the president when he picks his team. And the president will want to know how many JIFF players he has. And obviously, look at for Urias, who's the coach of Bordeaux, he's at 15.9. He'll get to 16, but it will be in his mind as he plans his selection over the next 3 or 4 rounds in top 14 to get to 16 and stay over 16. So that's the issue. The issue is, in terms of how it's improved, is it used to be 9. Okay, so when I was in Grenoble, I was able to have an average of 14 non-JIFF in my match day squad. And again, every week I'd have to go to the president when I picked the team and make sure that we were on target to hit 9. So it's the amount of foreign players you can pick has decreased massively, which has made the focus change on producing your own players. Plus, as I said, the money you get back from TV, the higher you are. So, for example, Agen are relegated, are about to be relegated. They're on 18.75. So for them now, the priority is to play as many JIFF players as they can towards the end of the season to get more money back, which would help them get promoted next year. The other thing that's changed as well is there's a sell-on value for French players. So, for example, a couple of guys in the Grenoble Academy when I was there are now playing elsewhere. So Ali Oz is a tight head at Racing, Gerassi is a second row at Lyon, Cordan is at Toulon, and Focard is at Clermont. Grenoble would have got a big check for all of those players because they came through our academy. So, again, even if the players are off contract, if they've been formed in your academy and they leave, you get basically a compensation based on how many years they spent in your academy, how many first team games they played, did they play French under 20s, etc. So there's a multiplier effect. So suddenly there's pressure on clubs to produce French qualified players because there's an incentive there in terms of money, but there's also a regulation in terms of the average. And that wasn't there 5 years ago. So hence the academies now are being run in a much more professional manner. Like, I'll be honest, when I got there in France, they were very amateur. The amateur association ran the academy and the professional team was the senior team. And there was a disconnect. Whereas now the presidents and the directors of rugby and the directors sportifs know that they're going to be reliant on that academy to produce players. So whereas Racing have gone and bought some of the best young talent from other clubs, they've also invested in their own academy. So in future, they don't have to buy the best talent. So these are the reasons why you see, like Dupont was formed in Cast, but Toulon, as I said, Toulouse went and bought him. But now clubs like Cast, clubs like Grenoble, clubs like Mont-de-Marsan, etc., they are spending more time trying to produce players for their own team, but also understanding the potential sale value, which can help I suppose, keep the club alive. So some smart decisions made by the league and the FFR together 4 or 5 years ago, which is now paying off in terms of having 5 teams in the quarterfinals of the Champions Cup, having a French national team full of young talent with massive depth. We saw the team that played against England in the final of the Autumn Cup, where a lot of their first string weren't available, and the drop down wasn't as high as probably would be in other countries. So it's, again, that going back to the Munster thing and the IRFU, these are the types of strategic decisions that need to be made now, that in 5 years' time you take for granted, when there's proper depth in each position.
And it was interesting to hear, I think it was Razzie Erasmus on Off the Ball, I think, this week. He said, he was just commenting from the outside, and he said Ireland's player pool and depth was one of the things he probably felt could improve in terms of only having, 160 players. Obviously, South African rugby has loads, and now France, as you say, has scary depth. And like Labelle is a fascinating example, because he played 2 years under 20s. In his first year under 20s, when he was obviously still a year underage, he was playing top 14 games. Obviously, he's a prodigious talent to be getting opportunity in a club like Toulouse. But if it wasn't there, then there was somewhere else he could have gone, because there are top 14 clubs and there are another 16 in the Pro D2. And guys, as Bernard has mentioned before, have gone there and played a lot of games. And there's exposure. Every time you look at the France under 20 squad at the start of a Six Nations Championship, the vast majority of them really these days have played senior rugby, whereas Ireland's haven't. I suppose another example would be Roman Entomac, and someone like Harry Byrne, who's slightly older than him, can't get a game with Leinster, I suppose, in the big games. And Entomac again was playing when he was probably a year underage for under 20s as well. So that's definitely a good point, Birch. You could probably do a whole podcast on that, but like where do you make that decision to do something different to benefit 5 years' time?
Yeah, just on the depth chart, you said 160 players in Ireland. I think Felix Jones, who's looking after the non-South African based players for the Springboks, he's a depth chart of, I think, 160, 70 South Africans who are playing in Europe that are being monitored and watched as potential. So there's an example. Look, it's obviously not ideal. They've all left, but suddenly they've got the best of what's in South Africa plus the best of what's left. And it's very unique to them. But it's just a case of being able to manipulate your system to try and get as many players exposed to game time. And the last point on this is, I know a couple of months ago we spoke about loan opportunities for young players in the Irish provinces to go and play Pro D2 or Championship or Premiership, and someone kind of overseeing that. There's also the other angle of would it be better off going down and playing ITM Cup? We see what Regan has done. Conor O'Donnell. Would there be opportunities to get some players away in the off season to have exposure to play ITM Cup or maybe Super Rugby, etc.? So these are the things that probably we need to start looking at to create a bigger player pool, and that'll help the national team and that'll also help the provinces.
Super stuff as always, man. Bernard, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mert.
Cheers, lads.
This podcast was brought to you in association with Guinness, proud sponsors of the Women's Six Nations, which kicks off this weekend. Remember to drink responsibly. Enjoy all of the games over the weekend as well. Champions Cup and Six Nations. It's not a bad little combination. We will be back on Monday. Murray and Owen Tulin back in his throne, and back in this regular slot as well next Thursday. In the meantime, mind yourselves. Take it easy.